duplicate things in Google. That's fun. Not transactional, huh? All right. It's 5 after, and why don't we go ahead and get started? Oh, hey, Brian's note taker is here. So all good. Thanks for coming up. Unfortunately, I got to notes late, and so I did not finish the highlights for PyIceberg or Rust. Big thanks to Soon for doing it last minute. So really appreciate that. Faco is out on leave, so we normally rely on him as well. Hopefully his leave is fun and going well. Anyway, I'll get started. Quite a few things to highlight the last few weeks. So I wanted to call out docs, and specifically, like, I know Manu doesn't often get mentioned for docs, but he's like constantly improving docs. So wanted to say thanks to him specifically, because I see just a lot of docs PRs going in that he's reviewing and working on, and that's awesome to see. Also, wanted to call out that Micah helped us get through and discuss PR merging guidelines that were now published to the site. So good to have those out there. And really good to see like the community coming together and discussing those things and getting guidance put together. I know we're doing that in other areas as well, but really nice to see that happening. And also, I wanted to highlight one last thing that I saw, which is that Druid was added to the sidebar as a link. Now, I think that's just interesting because I didn't know that Druid had direct Iceberg support, which is pretty cool. So more and more things are adding Iceberg support all the time. So thanks to Micah and Charles for those updates. Next, there are a few things that I wanted to highlight from the area of specifications. So number one, just a quick one, we never added the ability to actually remove partition specs through the REST catalog API. So thank you to Amogh for adding the RemovePartitionSpecsUpdate. And also thanks to Amogh for his earlier clarification that actually helped us do this, that if you don't recognize a particular update or validation type, you have to fail in the commit path. It's never okay to ignore an update or to ignore a validation just because it's not understood, which I think we all sort of took for granted, but it's good to have that explicitly called out. So that's great. There are two other fairly substantial ones. So first of all, thank you to Eduard, which sort of paved the way to the other one for getting the endpoint config into the config route. This allows us to basically add new endpoints to the REST spec and have some way of signaling to the client that the server supports those. So this fixes a bug in views where we couldn't tell if a view doesn't exist or just is not supported by the service, which would, anyway, we won't go into the minor issue, but it's really great now that we can add those endpoints to this spec. We also were able to add the server-side planning endpoints, which came in just a little bit after the endpoint config. Server-side planning is, I think, a really important feature because it allows us to do things, or will allow us to do things like hide the actual snapshots in a table. So in a case where you might have read access to a table's current state, but not read access to historical snapshots, you can actually implement that now. And there are a number of other things that you can do with this. There are ideas like being able to put Hive tables behind the Iceberg REST protocol, which would be really neat for extending read access in a lot of different places. So thanks to Rahil for pushing that through. It's been a long time coming. I think that was proposed in like Q1 of this year. So really great to see that, and we're moving on to the implementation. On the Java side, Incremental snapshot expiration was fixed by Dongwang, who is a first-time contributor, but I want to highlight this because he found an issue where incremental snapshot cleanup was deleting files in certain cases. And if you were to just go drop a particular snapshot, any snapshot with the data files that were deleted in that snapshot were now invalid. And we fixed that by simply saying, well, you can't use incremental cleanup and also expire a specific snapshot. So that was a good thing. So thanks for getting that in. Manu also, second highlight for him, backported parallel table migration to Spark 3.3 and 3.4. Always really nice to have people, looking after those older versions. So thanks a lot for that. Dan added the REST compatibility test kit, which basically allows you to run a very simple REST server from the test jar and run standard Iceberg tests against either a service or run a client against the standard service that we use in tests. So that should help us extend test coverage over a lot of different engines. Rodrigo, Peter, Liwei, and including commits that go back and include Kyle Ben Dixon, added the new V2 sync API, which is going to be necessary for Flink V2. So thank you guys for adding all the new Flink features. Sorry, I should actually say that's Flink V2 sync. There were also some Kafka Connect sync things going in. And finally, thank you to Jacob and I'm not aware, I don't know EPGIF's real name, but thank you guys for pushing through the timestamp nanoseconds implementation.
Thank you so much.
All right, then we've also got the 161 release. So I think Carl led that one. Thank you, Carl. The Rust 0.3.0 release. Sung did the 0.7.1 release and the 0.7 release. I'm not sure if those were both in the last 3 weeks. Oh, so those were the last one, sorry. And I'll hand it off to him for the remaining highlights on the PyIceberg side.
Hello? Yeah, okay, so over the last course of 3 weeks, we've added Python 3.12 support. Thank you, Kevin. We've also added caching for manifest files, which was added by Chinmay. And finally, we've added a safety check to prevent adding duplicate data files. This is for a migration procedure like API that adds existing Parquet files as data files to the table. And this is a similar safety check that we have in the Spark procedure as well. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Great to see so much progress here. And looks like we have one more note because someone else added this, but I'll go back to adding the server-side planning. Really excited to see that in there. So we'll just mention it twice. Thanks, Rahil. All right, I'll hand it off to Russell for 1.7.0 release planning.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about most of the issues right after this in our discussion topics, but basically we're still working on variant spec. The spec has been voted to be moved out of the Spark project and into the Parquet project. Parquet project is now doing votes on how exactly that's going to look. But I think we're probably good now to say we're going to link to whatever's in the Parquet spec as our support. And I know folks on our team, as well as Ryan and folks at Databricks, are all trying to figure out how we're going to do subcolumnarization and metadata for that as well. So that's all in progress. We have new proposal out by Anton, who's somewhere here, for new delete file layouts. So I encourage everyone to check that out because we're also hoping to get that into V3. And as well, we have the row lineage proposal, which I think everyone is pretty much in consensus on the higher points on. So I'm writing up a PR for the spec changes now. So that's all the big spec changes I think we have to go. We still have a bunch of implementations that have not been done. So if folks are interested, please check out the list of things that are in V3 but don't have reference implementations, because we're looking for things like someone to implement default values, for example. Other than that, I think everything is still on plan. Does anyone else have any issues for 1.7 that they wanted to bring? Yeah, Daniel?
I wanted to ask, like, that's a lot for the 1.7 release, and there may be reasons why we want to do a 1.7 prior to getting all of that in, including like the Kafka Connect, which is out there in master now, but it doesn't actually have a formal release yet. Is there anything specific that we would need to tie to the 1.7 as opposed to saying, we'll get these in, maybe it's 1.8 for everything, or, what's the reason for tying all of it to 1.7?
I don't think we have any specific reason. We were trying to get all the V3 things kind of in line with the 1.7 release, but there's no reason we can't do a kind of V3 in progress in 1.7 and have the full fleshed out implementation in like a 1.8 or something like that. Okay. I think my only big concern is we're about to, I know a lot of folks are ready to do some really big proposals for what V4 is going to look like. So I'd like us to get V3 solidified and released as soon as we can, so we can start thinking about that, because that's going to be a much longer term project, and I don't want it to be immediately following this up.
I agree. I don't know that we actually want to tie this to a specific release, but I do think that we want to get like real good progress and like wrap up V3 in early Q4. So I agree with that, but like some things I would really love to get out, and I don't know that it fits with our idea of, keep on releasing.
I mean, I would love to see where we are in 3 weeks at the next sync up and basically reevaluate that. Are we going to call it on some features or not? Because I think we should have all the spec work done, I think, by that point in time. And it's just a question of will we have reference implementations for everything done?
Yeah. Yeah, I think for some of them, again, like, historically we've kind of had the version flag as something that you can use, but it's not actually, released.
Yep.
For some of these, like they're big things, and we'd love to get people to bang on it early, just to flush out anything before we actually have a formal release. So there may be value in getting a couple releases out where people can opt into a V3 and start testing certain functionality. But
that is one thing that I wanted to bring up on sort of the miscellaneous V3 items. We have been, I think, jettisoning scope pretty quickly on the type promotion and all that stuff. So it looks like the main two types that we know are going to land, like geo is a probable as well, but the main two types are like timestamp nanos is there. We do need like readers and writers for it. So we'll get on that, but timestamp nanos actual like implementation and things exists. Then we've got variant. Now I know that those two types in particular are, very well, or highly desired types. So I'm actually wondering, do we want a feature flag at the table level to allow use in V2, even knowing that those types are going to break things? We have done this before. Just like it's kind of at your own risk in terms of what supports it. So curious if there's any desire for that, and that's something that we want to do. That would be one thing that could come out in 1.7, right? We could release timestamp nano support with a future flag.
I'm a little concerned about that. I think that the approach that we've taken in the past was more, you update your version and you may expect certain things in that version not to work or not to be supported, right? As opposed to using a current supported version and enabling specific features. So, there is precedent for, saying like, hey, we support V3, but we don't support like certain aspects of V3. So you can use variant, but you're not going to be able to use maybe the new deletes until they're finalized. I'm a little concerned about starting to backport features, because that could have all sorts of weird implications for engines.
We've done this in the past with the snapshot ID inheritance, because that was a so important thing for a lot of folks. So we added compatibility flag on the table, so you had to opt in for that specifically, and then in V2 we made that snapshot ID inheritance always there. So we've done this in the past. It's just I think what I'm a little bit worried about like finalizing V3 without a reference implementation, because what may look like an amazing approach on paper, once you start to implement, you uncover some of the issues. So at least I think it's okay to start releasing some of the V3 work, but as far as the formal vote on finalizing the V3 spec, I think that would you have to be sure that there is a reference implementation that works and it's proven that that's the approach, not just in V3.
So I agree with all that. I think the other reason that I would say maybe not start cherry picking support for certain features and pulling it back is we actually want people to move forward. Like there's good motivation to keep moving forward if there's new features and there's a carrot there for you to make the migration to V3 or experiment and start using it. But if we start setting the expectation that we'll pull things back, then we get this weird kind of gray area between versions where people are trying to just do enough to not have to do a migration forward. So there's a lot of good stuff in V3, and I really want to encourage people to move forward.
Yeah, I would be probably in favor of that unless it's absolutely needed, and then we can probably we should limit and not encourage this compatibility flag stuff as much as possible. But if it's absolutely necessary, do that.
Yeah. So I think the middle ground here is if people really, really want and need feature flags that pull this forward, we don't need to anticipate that need. We can wait until someone says, I really want to do this, and have a feature flag to do that if necessary. Okay, so never mind. Let's take that off the table for now. All right, hopping into discussion. Russell, I know you gave kind of a mini update on variant, but if you want to...
That's really all I wanted to say. That and hopefully we can get some... I know we're working on some implementation proposals, and I think, Ryan, you're working on one as well. So I'm hoping we can get those out and folks can start thinking about it. Because the way we implement variant metadata is something that everyone should be aware of, because we basically can't use the metadata fields as they currently are set up, because we might have arbitrary statistics tied to a specific field ID. So we've got some plans on how we might want to handle that, but be tuned in. That's coming soon.
Yeah. My type promotion PR, which keeps getting smaller, which is a good thing, does cover adding the variant type. Just so that we can, it actually covers adding unknown and variant, and then the adding type promotion tables and things. The one thing that I don't know that we completely understand, for at least adding the type to the spec and things like that, is, well, I guess where the variant spec is, because I have a link that doesn't work yet. The other thing, though, is how to support it in orc. So do we want to add? So currently I have a placeholder that says don't put it in orc. It's not supported in orc. I don't know if there's anyone out there that wants to volunteer to prototype this and take on the orc implementation.
I guess a good question here is, does anyone in this community sync use orc?
So I know that the LinkedIn guys use orc, and they may not be here right now, so this is probably a better dev list discussion to get a broader audience. I also think Trino uses orc. So I think it's important to highlight that, we don't have somebody like focused on it right now so that somebody can step up. I mean, it's a great way to contribute, for people who are interested in participating, but it is something we don't have like coverage in this group of people right now.
Yeah, I don't think we can have the conversation of like, is orc still a supported format? But we do definitely want to highlight that we could use some orc contributors to help us out with how variant should be stored in orc. Okay, then let's see. Type promotion, I have a couple things to mention. The first is that I think this was basically added because we wanted, we were thinking about two type promotion situations that were, I think, now precluded by metadata. So this is one of the areas where I think we should cut scope significantly. Because we're not going to be able to actually do the two type promotions that we thought we needed. We should just do, keep this to a minimum and do additional type promotions, hopefully in a future release once we have the metadata to actually make it work. I think that there's a good argument that even though we could do the int and long to string type promotion, it's not a good idea because it requires this analysis of when you can use the lower and upper bounds metadata. And not only that, it's just getting pretty complicated and weird, which is generally what I'm good at avoiding in the spec, but I think I was trying too hard to make this work. So unless there's like, a big uproar of, no, we really need long to string type promotion, I think that we should probably not plan on having that in there. So I've already, I believe, updated my PR. No, I need to update my PR to reflect that on type promotion. And then I think after that, once we get the variant spec locked down, we should have a place and we can get the new types into the spec. Yeah, Russell.
Oh, I just want to know how much do you have on variant in the PR? I just want to make sure we're not overlapping on stuff.
It basically says it has adds the type to the types table, says semi-structured data in the variant spec defined here, and then it has how to store it in Parquet, which is basically go look at the Parquet spec for storing variant, and how to store it in Avro, and how to store it in orc. Now, okay. In orc, I currently have just not supported. We don't know yet. So we'll need to fill that in. In Avro, I think what we should do is a struct or record type of the binary metadata and then the binary value.
Okay, and nothing on the subcolumnarization shredding yet, just the...
No, nothing on subcolumnarization, and also nothing on statistics. Okay. I think I can add that, but I figured we'd follow up on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any reason for the subcolumnarization that we could, like, if we don't get enough activity on like the Avro side, just leave it as not supported so it always produces just the variant?
Well, there's no reason to subcolumnarize in Avro. So Avro is only going to have a single supported way of storing variant.
Unless we rolled up statistics. I mean, it doesn't give you the benefit of the projection, but it does give you statistics.
So if you want to gather statistics, you could do that for Avro. But what we're going to do for lower and upper bounds is specify how to encode the lower and upper bounds, and then we're basically not going to care how you get those lower and upper bounds.
Cool.
Yeah, sounds good. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, since Russell, you brought it up, there is a fairly simple PR out there for adding default values to Avro and using them in a couple Avro object models. We will need to port that to the Flink and Spark Avro readers, but that should be fairly straightforward. And then we can also use the same approach to start adding default values to Parquet in other areas. This is again another area where I don't think that we have anyone with strong knowledge of orc, and we will need to make sure that we get the orc support done.
I say JB just volunteered to take a look at that. So
awesome, thank you. Okay, and then Anton, do you want to talk about where we are with V3 deletes and sort of make sure we're having a good discussion around what is in the proposal and driving towards consensus, because I think we also want to move pretty quickly on V3 with deletes.
Yeah, so I think their discussion was fairly positive so far. Everyone seems to be more or less on board that kind of addresses all of the limitations we have in V3. I'm working on some of the PRs to show how the implementation will look like, because some of the discussions touch on some of the topics that it's just much easier to point to a PR and explain how that's going to look like. If there are any big open questions, let me know, and if there are any, we can probably discuss them now. But I don't think there are any blockers so far. Yeah, that's about it. I have this end-to-end locally implemented this proof of concept, so it seems to work fairly fine.
Awesome. Is there any discussion on the current proposal that people want to ask questions about or bring up now?
One of the things that I think is still discussed in the dev list as well is where the Python readers and writers should live for the C++ based implementation. And I think my sense, at least on that, is we need to do whatever is best for the C++ engines. So if they can, I think there are two options. Either they would need to depend on Rust, or we can add another repo that would be C++ code. For now, it will only called readers and writers for Python, which I think is reasonable enough. But I would probably expect the C++ engines to make the call here, whatever's easier. If it's okay for them to integrate the Rust library, that's okay. But if they say they will push back and say it doesn't really work, then I don't have a problem with the separate C++ repo to call that.
Yeah, I think we can continue that discussion on the dev list probably. I don't really have a strong opinion, kind of what the C++ community wants to do. Okay. Well, I encourage people to go out and take a look at the V3 deletes. Like Russell was saying on the timeline here, we really want to get this, the V3 stuff done and in the spec as soon as possible to unblock some of these implementation things. So it'd be great to get more eyes on these things. All right, and I'll hand it back to Russell for row IDs and tracking.
Well, I guess I kind of mentioned it already. Basically, if you haven't seen the proposal, what we've kind of settled on is using a global metadata like high watermark, which is basically used to assign a row identifier automatically if you have this feature enabled, and then a version which will track the last sequence number that updated a specific row. So with those pieces of information and the snapshots history, you should be able to determine when any row was created or updated as long as all the writers follow that. So I'm writing up the PR to add it to the spec. I should probably ping you, Ryan, with this as soon as I have, because I'm modifying tables, and tables are probably going to conflict if you're also modifying tables in the markdown.
Oh yeah, don't worry. Yeah, I mean, luckily the tables, as long as you're not reformatting them, the tables are pretty good. So just don't spend a whole lot of time aligning the columns. and you don't generally get conflicts. That's why we've moved to kind of like uglier tables in Markdown, but we have fewer merge conflicts.
Yeah,
conflicts out.
I think I need to disable IntelliJ has like an automatic reformat, so it keeps changing everything when I add stuff and realigning it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I guess one general question to everyone. So like currently the way we have the spec, we have these tables of what fields belong to certain things, and we have a column for each version that we currently have. This is quickly going to become unreadable. With version 3, that means there's now like version 1 is this field required, version 2 is this field required, version 3 is this field required. And especially between version 3 and version 2, there's going to be very few changes. So we basically are just duplicating a lot of information. So I'm wondering if we do need to restructure this into something that is better long-term for going between different versions.
So I think let's let it, sorry, my stance is let's let this become a problem first, because there are ways of saying like, you know, it's required in V3 plus and optional in V2 and things like that. I think you quickly start getting into like ugliness there that the table really helps with. And I think we're also probably going to have cases where, you know, most of the time we're not changing all the structures. So it's just a few, 1 or 2 tables where we're having, you know, potentially this issue. So I would like to continue with the current approach as long as we can, because I don't think that there's a much better option.
Yeah, I'm not sure, other than I could think of some clever things we could do where we have like tabs or something rather than like a straight up table where you can just pick the option you want to look at. Because like soon we're just gonna have this massive information that's irrelevant, and then the actual important stuff after that.
Yeah, that's true. But even then, like, do you trust everyone to click through every single tab when reading the spec to, I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think we have a good answer. I think V3 though is going to be the last time we can add a column without it just being completely unreadable.
But we also hopefully are not going to be adding that, because like some of the tables don't even have columns for V1 or V2 because we didn't modify those structures in V1 or V2. So like,
we can also like shorten some of it so it gives us a little bit more spacing. So it's just O or R, and then we have columns. Because like right now, like I can see a third column, but you're right. Once we go to 4, like just the spacing alone is going to be problematic.
Yeah.
So we can finagle with it and then figure out like, do tabs make more sense? Like, should we expire older versions at some point? Like that's also a consideration.
So that is a very good point. Like so far we've said all older versions are, you know, or sorry, all older metadata structures are valid. And we've never had a situation in which we've said like, you know, you can't write this moving forward. I mean, metadata file, the root metadata file we have said like, okay, this is required in V2. We may actually want to start dropping certain features. Kind of like how I like how the V3 deletes do this, where it basically says, you know, like, hey, positional delete files in Parquet, no longer something you should write into V3 tables. Use the better, you know, more efficient delete format that can be, you know, tracked at the individual file level. So I think we could do things like that, right? Maybe in V4 we say, you know, hey, Avro manifests, don't write any more Avro manifests or something like that.
Yep.
Not saying that we're doing that, just we might want to start doing that. And if we do, we can come up with, you know, that basically resets this problem for manifest files at least.
Yeah. Worth thinking about. Yeah, well, once I have this PR, if we can take a look on the GitHub play, anyone who does not have as wide a monitor as me can tell me how bad that looks. It's the description column just keeps shrinking, and like that's where all the information I want keeps getting harder to read.
I do like, I understand the motivation to put things in description, but I've also have tried to keep that short, right? Like a short description, and then anything specific, just call out in a note or something that points from that field to basically keep long blocks of text out of tables.
Yeah, just
All
to
right.
tell you how it looks now.
We could go back to Google Docs too.
Yeah.
I found the old what was it, like V1 spec in Google Doc that I used to maintain the other day, and I was like, oh wow, it's been a long time. All right. Thank you for that update on row IDs and tracking. I'm trying to think. Okay, we've got 20 minutes left. Yeah, let's talk about expiration time for storage credential in the spec.
Hey everyone, thought of raising this with in the community thing with like some of the OSS implementation of the REST catalog spec. We define the expiry time as part of the spec itself for the catalog one, but not for the storage one. So some of the implementations currently like Polaris or the Unity catalog for the REST catalog, they kind of have introduced the custom property for the storage credentials. So it would be, I thought of like better if we can finalize on the property, and eventually like the catalog client itself can support the refresh one if possible, but at least if we can finalize on the expiry time property for the storage credentials, it will help us in like a lot of integrations with like the available REST catalog implementations.
So the problem is, so I know that we have a expiration. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay, so I don't know what you were going to say, Ryan. I'm looking at the PR that's posted, and I think that there's a question in terms of like, well, what expires at are we talking about here? Because the one in the first PR that's linked is about the OAuth token that's used as part of the REST protocol. The other PR that's linked is about expiration related to credentials that are passed back through the load table config. So which one are you talking about in this case?
Hey Daniel, I was in both the scenarios. I was just referring to the table load itself, the table load, the storage credentials itself, not the catalog one. Maybe the description of the PR might be wrong, but yeah, the intention was to focus on the storage itself.
Okay, because I think that like the PR I think is actually pointing to the one that's actually part of the catalog config, and in that case, the expires at is part of the OAuth token. So I think we were expecting that it would be part of the JWT. For the credentials, so you're saying that you're focused on the credentials expires at?
Right. Like initially when I made the changes, I kind of added that expire at milliseconds to the AWS configuration itself. But again, I have linked the third PR where kind of like we are trying to document all the properties that are supported across the substrate itself, right? Then there was like suggestion to move this property to a general configuration, which is basically returned in the config block itself. So it's not really related to the catalog itself. It's purely expiry time related to the storage one. But
Okay.
again, based on the PR feedback, I moved to a different section.
Yeah, I think that, so the two PRs that we have, it's kind of like we're now in this situation where we're bridging the current way that we're passing this information and the way that we want to pass it in the future. So the PR that Eduard has up is breaking out the actual credential definitions as actual REST objects within the spec. And this has been asked for a while now. Can we use the AWS? So Yufei, we'll get to your question because I don't understand it. But the point is, like, we've got properties right now in the config map that kind of are used by the file IO implementations to set up, you know, the actual session token, client credential, whatever it is, to talk to the underlying storage. And we probably do need to include an expires at if that's a point of concern. But Eduard's approach is actually addressing the larger question of both the representation, making sure that we have all the necessary fields. We also know what the underlying storage is, so that it's not just being handled through, well-known property names. So in terms of this, I would probably start from Eduard's and figure out what gap we have in the current representation as opposed to changing the current one and then independently trying to do what the next iteration of this looks like.
I agree with that, because I think it's really good that we're doing this cleanup work on it. I would also mention that this area is ugly because there are multiple different ways of doing this. So OAuth has in the protocols and flows, OAuth will send back a expiration window. So it'll send back like expires in n seconds. The tokens, if you're using JWTs at least, also have a expiration timestamp, which is generally more accurate because your expiration number of seconds from the time that you were able to actually process something may well be like just not not accurate anymore. And there's quite a bit of weird timestamp math to make all that work. So like when we do a refresh, we will get the current timestamp, refresh a token or exchange a token, and then take that and if the token is not a JWT with a specific timestamp, we will actually go and use the timestamp that we saved from beforehand. So like there's a lot of ugliness here just because of the different ways of expressing when to refresh a token or when this happens. So we may honestly not be able to solve some of this. I'm also a little worried about the approach of a general config for swapping tokens after some number of seconds or milliseconds, because the different token types that you could potentially send back to the client will have dramatically different expirations as well. So like you might have an hour-long expiration on you might have, say, a 24-hour expiration on, hey, you exchanged your credential through client credentials flow. Here's your token that has your identity. But then when you go and cache your actual, get a token for a specific table for that identity, you'll probably have something more like an hour window. And again, if you're talking something specific to storage, it's up to S3 or Azure or GCS, what that token looks like, when to refresh it, and all of that. So this is kind of a complicated area. I'm not sure we're going to be able to clean it up too much.
So Eduard's proposal for what we're going towards to support like the refresh case, I think handles most, if not all of that, because all of those providers do provide, like when you generate the token, they do provide some information as to when it expires, we can then send back.
Right.
And so the first piece is getting well-defined credentials, including things like expiration time that the client can understand. And from a REST protocol perspective, regardless of like the implementation, that's just useful. And then for the implementation, we want to follow up with how do we define like the basic refresh flow for most of the clients that would be using this against that REST protocol. So
yeah, but we won't have a general like refresh all tokens after n seconds.
No, not that. I mean, they independently should know and refresh as makes sense. And I think that is an approachable problem. I think the main thing I wanted to point out is I don't think that we want to lean into the old property config to support both paths for refresh. So we may want to include some expiration time if that's useful via the property mechanism. But all of the refresh logic and anything that we do should be based on this new approach with well-defined credential structures and things like that, just so that it's clear what we're working against, and we don't have to support two different variations of what the definitions are. So maybe it would make sense. If Eduard was going to get together a proposal doc, we'll add that, and we can add comments to it, and we'll see if this is actually necessary to include, because I don't think that the clients would actually be doing anything with these additional values right now.
Okay, I think that sounds like a plan. Are you happy with that, Manendra?
Yeah. Thank you.
So to like one of my concern for the Eduard proposal is what if like these particular vendors credential, like the field has changed. Oh, okay, that's fine. I think so. Yeah, sorry. I think we've already standardized all these key names in our then that's where companies that clients will get that and okay, sounds good.
And for backwards compatibility, we're just suggesting that you always set the properties, even if you return the new structure, and then we'll just figure out what that looks like for the full request response path.
Yeah, I think the last night we just got another field for the AWS, which is client regions. I think we should also add that to that as well.
Yeah, I saw that. It would. I think I raised this on the Polaris dev list, but how do you guys want to? Are you planning on forking the spec or maintaining it? Like, because I kind of want to hopefully make sure that we don't diverge.
No, I don't think we're gonna forking that. It is an issue not resolved in Paris, and I think it's also the every other implementation of the REST catalog. So I think we're still Eduard's proposal looks promising, and we can waiting for that to add that. But at this moment, we can just put the owners, the one within the common session instead of the schema. Because
sorry, so there's no plan. You do want to maintain the specification as much as possible in the Iceberg community.
No, I think so the Parquet is not trying to maintain Iceberg to REST spec or adding anything to diverge that. Yeah, that's my point.
Cool. Yeah, I think it'll be good to set those expectations so that people know, like, hey, like the best way to get stuff in is to go and standardize it in the Iceberg community, because I do hope we can prevent drift. Okay, cool. Let's get to SLF for J. We're running out of time. Stephen?
Yeah. So I have a thread in the dev manifest, but I want to bring some awareness here. So apparently our login for the test, for the Iceberg test code, have been broken since 1.4. Because our test dependency brings in SLF4j 2.x, and our binding for the implementation have been on 1.x. That have been, but in the past, the problem limited to the test. But there was in the main branch, you upgrade the arrow dependent to 1.12, which also brings SLF4j 2.x. That means if we release 1.7, or the downstream, they may pull in the SLF4j 2.x. If they don't upgrade binding, the login will be broken. So I have a PR to just upgrade our binding for the test to 2.x, but I want to make sure everyone is aware if I'm moving to SLF4j 2.x, or the downstream can be impacted by the upgrade.
I think as long as it's in tests, we should be fine, right?
Well,
it's also updating the production version. So the non-test version of SLF4j, the API version.
Wait. So is this affecting Iceberg tests or Iceberg actual core modules?
So in the past, it only affected the test. But with the Avril 1.12 upgrade we did this last month in the main branch, it can affect all the downstream. Let's say Spark, Flink. If you put in Iceberg with this release, as a 1.7 release, we're going to require people to have the SLF4j 2.x binding for the implementation.
So do we need to exclude, what is the upgrade path? It sounds like Avro upgraded, we pulled in that release, and now we've got an issue in main. What is the upgrade path for SLF for J? Do we know?
So I think there are two options. Either we, in the 1.7 release, we documenting this upgrade so people are aware of this potential change. Or we exclude SLF 2.x in our main. And Iceberg stay on 1.x.
Okay. Is there no like adapter path for this? I'm surprised that SLF for J would have like a hard, like a log breaking upgrade.
Well, is it
used?
Yeah, it's from 1.x to 2.x. From the log, you can see that they say, hey, we are seeing 1.x binding. Logging is not working. They do put that error message explicitly. But they do not require the 2.x binding for the API.
I was just wondering if there's like a 2.x to 1.x translation to help people through so that you can bind both 1.x and 2.x and send through 1.x or send through 2.x, right? Because it seems like with libraries out there, you're going to have a mix of dependencies on 1x and 2x. Or maybe just upgrading to 2x is the recommended path.
Well, are you saying that can we have both binding coexist in the
I'm just wondering, like, not the binding layer, but like the actual log API, right? So Avro's on 2.x, we're on 1.7. How do downstream applications that have some logger binder or bound logger, how do those actually work with? Yeah, we probably just need to read through the compatibility page and figure this out.
Yeah, I don't think it work out of the box. I think if we upgrade it to 2.x and, for example, Trino runs with 1.x, I think that might cause logging to not work out of the box, at least.
I mean, I think everyone is probably most okay with losing Avro logs and not.
But this is affecting all logs, like anything we log, any loggers we use in Iceberg. Because we're upgrading not just SLF4J for tests, but we're also upgrading it in general for all modules.
Well, yeah, what I'm saying is we can exclude the 2.x Avro dependency and basically throw away Avro logs. Well, I guess it doesn't matter because that would be in the class path, but like anything you can either have a bound 1.x or a bound 2.x, right?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay, so like I think if the majority of our downstream projects use 1.x, we should continue using 1.x and then like keep an eye on when we should move to 2.x. This is ugly.
We can continue on the dev menu, but I think I want to bring some awareness here.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting this. That's a pretty ugly upgrade. All right. We have 1 minute left. Do we want to talk about blob type or discuss on the mailing list?
Yeah, we can probably discuss on the main list. There's not enough time for that.
Thanks, especially since we have a hard stop, and it'll just kick us out. So awesome. Thank you, everyone. Good to